Welcome to Shooting Straight with Brad and David. I'm Brad Carlyon, your Navajo County Attorney.
I'm David Clouse, your Navajo County Sheriff.
And this month, our guest is Jen Marson, the Executive Director of the Arizona Association of Counties. Jen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So what exactly is the Arizona Association of Counties?
That's a great question. So we are actually a nonprofit that was created in the 60s to advocate on behalf of county government here in Arizona. And we have been doing that for over 50 years now. And most of our work is at the state level, interacting with the state legislature, but we do some work at the congressional level as well.
So who makes up the Arizona Association of Counties?
So the counties are the members of the association, and then we work very specifically with all the elected officials at the county level. There are 10 categories of elected officials in county government, but then there's also what we call associate members. So some of the different departments, like for example the elections directors or the county librarians, we also work with them as well, even though they're not elected positions.
So exactly what kind of role does ACO do to help county government?
So predominantly we're an advocacy voice to make sure that people understand what counties do. Many people think that the services that they receive or the way that they interact with government always happens at the city level or the state level, but in fact a lot of the things that provide services and information to the citizens of Arizona come from county government. So not only do we advocate and make sure that any laws that are passed are going to benefit county government and not harm them. That's a primary goal, but also we serve as an education voice to the community to share what it is that counties do and how they operate and what it means to work in county government.
Well, so you just begged the question, what do counties do?
So many different things. So, I mean, if you look at just the elected positions, right, forget about all of the department heads as well, but if you look at the elected positions, you're talking about property tax, setting tax rates, the criminal justice system with the county attorneys and the sheriffs, crime prevention, of course. Then you've got the county school superintendents who are involved in education and providing education in different environments, like an incarceration environment, for example, or an accommodation school. With the county treasurers, we have a financial component that counties are involved in. Recorders, of course, they do elections as well as public records. And then you talk about the department heads. You've got transportation, planning and zoning, healthcare. So counties do so much. In fact, they do so much that in any given legislative session, nearly half of all of the bills that are introduced impact counties in some way.
That's staggering in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the biggest thing, a lot of confusion is that they think it's a lot of folks in the community think county is another level of government, but more so it's an extension of the state. Could you explain a little bit of what that is?
So counties are sort of an arm of the state. That's the way that legally they're set up. And unfortunately, that can cause some problems because the state has the authority to essentially tell counties what to do in some instances, whereas cities may have their own charter, so they have a little bit more autonomy to make decisions, whereas counties can only do that which the legislature grants them the authority to do. So if it's not in statute, counties can't do it.
So what have been some of the challenges that have faced counties statewide these last few years?
I mean, the biggest challenge is a money challenge. When the recession hit in 2008, the state has relied very heavily on counties to help balance the state's budget. I mean, just in the transportation realm alone, the state has taken $1.2 billion with a B, billion dollars from local governments, from HURF, which is an acronym HURF that stands for Highway User Revenue Funds. So 1.2 billion has been taken out of local government HURF. That's just not just county money. So think about all of your constituents. Sure, they live in your county, but they also live in a city like Show Low, Holbrook, Pine Top, what have you. The 1.2 is a local government cost shift from those local governments to the state in order to fund DPS. So $1.2 billion that should have come to local governments since 2008 has instead been shifted to the state, and counties and cities are left with finding magical ways to make up those transportation dollars. That's been a huge hit to counties.
In this past session, the legislature tried to not take the HERF money by passing the car registration fee. But that seems to be going away.
Yeah, so in 2018, they passed the new VLT, which allowed them to not do the sweep. But then in the 2019 session, there were some that were very upset about that new fee. And so that fee is going to be phased out. And so our concern from an entity that advocates for counties is as that phase out happens, the shift will return. And all of a sudden, we'll be looking at less transportation dollars again.
And what are some of the other ways that the legislature has shifted costs from the state to the counties?
So there's a couple other big areas. One of them is the Department of Juvenile Corrections. The state has asked, hey counties, can you just give us $11 million a year? No, you don't have any input about how the program is run or ways to be more cost efficient. We just want you to write us a check. The same thing has happened with the Department of Revenue in recent years, though we did have some success in having some of those monies reversed, but same concept. Counties use Department of Revenue services. This is the logic from the legislature, right? So, hey, why don't you just write us a check for some of the money to offset the cost of paying for DOR. There's also costs associated with people who are in ASH, which is the Arizona State Hospital. RTC is restoration to competency. So when someone isn't competent to stand trial, we have to put them through a process, yes, right, to get them to be restored. And a higher percentage of those costs have been put onto the counties in recent years. In addition, the costs for SVP, sexually violent persons, and the treatment of those persons in the state hospital has also been shifted to counties.
Another one that I hear from our county administration is a big cost that we have little control over is ALTEX.
ALTEX, another acronym. The legislature is very fond of acronyms. So ALTEX is the Arizona Long-Term Care System, and it's medical costs that the counties pay to help run the access program and the long-term care program within the access program. And this is like the granddaddy of them all, because it was in place long before the recession era cuts started. And it's the state saying, here's tens of millions of dollars that we want the counties to give us every year, but we don't want any county or local government input at all about how to make that program more cost efficient, so that, okay, maybe we're still a partner in terms of providing funds, but maybe the funds that we could provide would be less if we were able to be at the table and decide a better way for those funds to be used. So
what are some of the challenges or some of the problems that the counties face with some of these shifting of like HERF funds and all these other funds that are going to the state? Across the state of Arizona, what have you seen, how it's impacted counties? Yeah, I mean, I think the transportation and the HERF dollars is one of the biggest ones, because actually it was in Navajo County that I heard the statistic maybe a year and a half ago. We are at the point now where Navajo hasn't added a single new mile of a new road, because the little bit of money that they do have is going to maintain the old system. Yeah, the old system and the deteriorating roads that you have. And so because that cost shift has been going on for so long, many counties, not just Navajo, are at a point of having to replace roads instead of maintain roads, and replacement is always more expensive than maintenance. And you know, the $32 tax, like
the
VLT.
Yep.
I don't know all the acronyms
okay.
like you do, but there's a lot. They say it says a public safety fee. Does that fee, and I know the answer to this, but I want to hear it from you. Does that fee go to fund public safety in here in Navajo County, or where does that go? Because a lot of my constituents, a lot of people in the Navajo County believe that that's what's funding the sheriff's office.
No. The short answer is no. The money absolutely isn't going to your office. The public safety fee is a little bit different than the VLT, I think was what you're referring to, but the public safety fee goes into a larger fund that mostly funds DPS. Now there is a portion of that money that goes into a different fund that's called the Public Safety Equipment and Training Fee, I think, and that money is supposed to be used to provide public safety equipment to a variety of entities throughout the state. In theory, that's how it's written, right?
Yes.
The challenge is, and there's a committee that's been designed to look at how much money is coming in, look at who's essentially applying for those funds, and then deciding where those funds will go. The challenge is that pot of money is not generating enough money as the people who put it in place thought that it would. So there's millions of dollars that have been encumbered to these like large endeavors, predominantly in Maricopa County, Pinal County, and western Arizona, but there's not even enough money in the fund to pay for the things that are currently encumbered. So now we're year 1, year 2, we're probably going to be in year 3 or 4 before there's enough money there. Is the thing that's set in statute to pay for worth it 4 years later? If you could have bought it that day, maybe that technology would have worked for those entities that got it. But 4 years down the road, we're going to make the assumption that that same technology is still what counties need then. I don't think that's sound logic.
With the change in technology on almost a daily basis.
Exactly.
That's crazy.
But it's absolutely not funding your office.
Yeah. What are some of the what is ACO doing to kind of combat some of these issues that we're talking about?
So one of the key things to note about ACO is that because we work essentially on behalf of the elected officials, those aren't decisions that are made by me or my staff, right? We are serve at the pleasure of an elected board of directors or an elected legislative policy committee that guides our interaction at the legislature. So right now we're sort of in a holding pattern because we're waiting for our members to tell us what bills they'd like us to carry in the 2020 legislative session, our offensive package, if you will. In addition, bills for the 2020 session haven't started to drop yet to become part of the system where we could look them up and see what's out there. That will start happening mid-November. So while there's some scuttlebutt, you always hear, oh, so-and-so wants to do this law, so-and-so wants to do that. Nothing has been introduced yet. I do expect to see many bills associated with criminal justice reform in some capacity. I think we will see a school safety bill, which we saw in 18, but it didn't go anywhere.
The governor's school safety bill or a different one?
The governor's school, well, I think it will start with the governor's school safety bill and see how it pans out. It didn't go anywhere in 18. We thought we were going to see something to that effect in 19, but we didn't, so we'll almost certainly see it in 20.
What are some of the details on that school safety bill?
So the school safety bill was in 18 was a direct result of the shooting in Florida, of course. And the sound bites of that bill, or the bullet points that made it into the paper, sounded awesome, right? And everybody is interested in keeping children safe. There's nobody who doesn't want to do that. The nuts and bolts of the way that the plan worked put a lot of emphasis on the Department of Public Safety, which is an excellent agency, but they don't know the local areas like the local sheriffs or the local police departments do. And so from an entity that advocates on behalf of sheriffs, we were part of the conversation to say maybe a higher responsibility and level of interaction between the schools should be with the sheriff's office, should be with the local police department, instead of putting that on the Department of Public Safety. That was one of the bigger issues that we had with the 2018 version. I know we've been in many meetings since then with the governor's office, and I hope that if a version comes out in 2020, it will take some of those factors into consideration.
So I know Sheriff Clouse has deputies that are often in many of the county schools, and same with the local PDs.
Right.
They know the teachers, the schools, the layout. Issues.
A lot of our argument was community-based. We're a community-based sheriff's office with those schools in our jurisdiction. In some cases, in some of our communities, they're just across the street or down the street from our substations, and so we have a great understanding of how they operate. And that was some of our opposition to it. Was we're all for it, but let it be community-based.
Absolutely.
You know, I've had the pleasure of serving on the ACO committee for a number of years, and usually the bills that the elected officials bring to ACO for consideration are in the teens. This year there's like 40-some.
Yeah, it's...
Why do you think there's been such an increase of the bills that we're asking ACO and the board to look at?
You know, that's a question I've been thinking about a lot, because you're right. I think the maximum number of proposals we've received in any year is maybe 20. And then the board culls that down to like maybe 10 or 12 bills, right? We have 42 legislative proposals this year. It's an unprecedented number. I don't know, maybe there's something in the water. But I do think that counties have been kind of hit over the head by the state in a variety of different ways, whether it's an unfunded mandate, like some of the things we've talked about, or just a new thing that you have to do, or a new way to do something differently that they didn't let us provide input on, that they're not going to take it anymore, is part of it. I think the counties have decided, all right, we're going to have to be a little bit more proactive about the things we need to see for our offices to function better, and so we're going to give ACO more proposals than we ever have before.
So a little bit of a pushback in a way.
I think so, yeah.
So you brought up a very unique term, not unique term, but a very important term, unfunded mandate. We hear that a lot at our level. Kind of explain to some of the viewers what we mean by unfunded mandates.
So, for example, let's go back to school safety for a second. So one of the things that was talked about last year, not in the governor's bill, there wasn't one, but in a different legislator's bill, wanted to mandate that sheriff's offices go in and do assessments of every school about like their security assessment, right?
Yes.
Which sounds like a great idea, but it had to be done within 4 months. Right? You're laughing because there's no way that the 15 sheriff's office, even the biggest one in Maricopa County, could do a legit evidence-based assessment of all of the schools in the county's safety in 4 months. You don't have the manpower, you don't have the resources, and if you did, I still don't think that you could get it done in time.
Yeah, how thorough is it going to be?
Exactly. And so if you want it done right versus want it done, those are two very different things. If the sheriffs are going to involve themselves in an endeavor like that, they want it done right. And so we had to oppose that piece of legislation because that is absolutely an unfunded mandate. Your office would have to go and find magic money somewhere on the magic money tree to be able to hire more people to do these assessments to comply with the law that the legislature created for you, unfunded mandate.
Yeah, and that's what I think ACO does a lot on behalf of the sheriffs, is looking out for bills that would require my office or the other 14 county sheriffs to say, you guys are now going to have to do this, but how are we going to pay for it?
Exactly.
Or as you described it earlier, defensive work at the legislature.
Yeah, a lot of defensive work for us.
So last year, for example, we had 10 bills in our offensive package, but we were active on 101 other bills that other entities introduced. Some of them we liked, most of them we didn't. So that was our defensive work.
In that 100 and some, it's just the ones that were actually moving. There were still many more that were introduced that
Correct.
never got before a committee or seemed to have any legs of any kind.
Yeah, so there were just over 1,400 bills introduced last session. We were tracking 803 that had some kind of county impact, and we took active positions on 101.
So how big of a staff do you have at ACO to work in all these bills and the other projects that you do every year?
You know, I'm very proud of the work that we do with 5 full-time employees. So there's me, we have a finance person, 2 lobbyists, and then a communications person. Sometimes we'll take on an intern during the legislative session, but we are fully staffed at 5.
And since you only mentioned 2 lobbyists, and I assume you do a little bit of yourself at times, do you call on members of ACO to help you then at the legislature to explain the impact of some of the ideas they may have that are good in principle but have issues with implementation?
Absolutely. I think first and foremost, we start with for example, if it's one of our offensive items, we may start with the champion of that item, who submitted it to us, right? But absolutely, we rely on our board of directors, or our officer chain, our president. We have a president, and then a second, and a third vice president as well. We do the lobbying. The way I would love it to work is if we did the lobbying behind the scenes, get everybody prepped on the committee, but then the expert comes in and does the testimony in committee. Now that's not always possible because you all have real jobs that you have to be in your counties doing your jobs, and the legislature is a fickle beast when it comes to time management. So asking you to come down to Phoenix to maybe sit around for 5 hours just to learn that your bill's been held is not an efficient use of your time.
Did that a couple times last year.
Right? Yeah, and so, but it's almost impossible to predict. So we have lots of our members who are willing to come down, but they take some heat sometimes in their communities because they're not there, and so it's really an interesting balancing act about how do we get that messaging out and who's the best person to deliver it.
You know, ACO works on the state level. Are you part of a group that works on the federal level doing the same type of work?
Yeah, very similar. A lot of our federal work goes through the National Association of Counties. So like there's a state association of counties like ACO in every state. There's the national organization, and we partner with them or other entities like the National Sheriff's Association on a variety of different pieces of legislation. It's as frustrating as it is to work at the state level and get bills passed here. In Congress, it's almost more frustrating. They're doing things, but sometimes they're not doing the big things because they get mired down in the politics of it all. So it could be a multi-year endeavor at the congressional level, whereas maybe we can get something done in a single year here.
What are some of the big issues on the federal level that you have been working with NACO and the local counties on?
You know, one of the biggest ones right now actually will impact your office, and that's what we call the Medicaid exclusion policy. There's this phenomenon, I like to call it, that happens where someone has been accused of a crime, they're brought into jail, and let's say they have federal health care benefits. The moment that they walk in the door, that benefit goes away, and the county is on the hook for those medical costs for that person in their facility, even though we belong to a system that says you're innocent until proven guilty. Just because you're inside the sheriff's office doesn't mean that you're guilty of what you've been accused of. So we are working, the states are working, and the sheriff's offices are working with NACO and with the National Sheriff's Association to address this at the congressional level. And there's really two prongs, right? The first is, if you walk in the door, you get to keep your benefit until you're proven guilty. That's number one. But number two is, okay, let's say you're guilty and your benefit does go away. We want it to be suspended and not terminated, so that when you do eventually move out of the jail system back out into the public, if you're terminated, it can take up to 4 months for those benefits to be reinstated. So if you're talking about someone who needs medication, maybe they have some mental health issues, we don't want them going 4 months, otherwise we're going to see them back in jail before those 4 months are even up. So if we could suspend the benefit, that way it's much faster to reinstate it once they get out of the jail environment instead of terminate it, that would help. So it's a two-prong approach from our perspective.
How do you think that would impact your jail?
You know, that's the conversation that we have with most of the police, the chiefs of police in each of the counties, is the cost of incarceration. There's something we call jail fees and medical costs that are a big proponent of the major expenditure for the county jails in each of the 15 counties. And we're looking for several ways to lower those costs. And the most expensive is the medical inside the facility. And if people came in with their own medical cost, or they covered their own medical, then how much budget relief that would be for us.
What a percentage do you think of those coming in your jail have substance abuse and or mental health issues?
I don't know the exact percentage, but it's well over 50%, and that's being conservative on the number. And we're seeing a lot of our repeat offenders are, because they lose those benefits, they fall off it, and we're talking about the 4-month suspension or that long suspension to get back on it, and they're the repeat, and then they're back in the jail system over and over.
Do they tend to be a bigger headache for your detention officers because they've been off their medication so long? And
that's another challenge with all the sheriffs in the state is we train our detention officers on care, custody, and control, but then now we're trying to train them on how to be mental health experts, which really that's not their job or what they're been trained to do, and that's what we're trying to work with, is how do we deal with these issues, and it's a big cost that we're trying to curb, and I think this is something that would help all the counties in
Absolutely.
Arizona.
And there should be a continuity of care and medication.
Yeah.
PILT is another term that I hear all the time from the federal level.
Yep.
What exactly is PILT and how does that impact counties?
So PILT is an acronym, again, PILT, Payment in Lieu of Taxes. And it is really it's a promise that the federal government made to counties back in the early 1900s that said, hey, counties, you got a lot of federal forest land in your county that you can't tax because it's federal land. So we know you need the revenue, so we're going to give you a payment in lieu of collecting those taxes, PILT. Unfortunately, in recent years, let's say the last decade, for example, PILT payments have lowered to the counties. So, and in some years, it's been a struggle to even get them authorized at all. And PILT dollars can be used for anything. So when PILT money comes into a county, it goes into the county general fund. So some counties are using it for criminal justice reasons. Some counties are giving vaccines with PILT money. It's a variety of different things. You can use PILT for anything, but if you don't get it, Well, now you still have to provide those things from, again, the magic money tree, right? If your PILT payment isn't coming in. One of the things that we are working with the National Association of Counties on is to have PILT permanently reauthorized. It's one thing to go to Congress every year and say, please, can I have this money? How about this year? How about this next year?
Go and remind them.
Go and remind them. And instead of doing that, what we would like is a permanent reauthorization with a very clear and easy to understand funding formula so that counties have an expectation of what kinds of money they could expect in the following year when they're doing their budgets.
So, and you provide services on the forest land, don't you?
Yeah, and I was going to bring up the point. Navajo County is one that has a large area of national forest. Does that mean that we don't have calls for service out there, or does that mean it's like a big state park or a federal park? No, we have recreators, we have people that come up and enjoy the forest, which we welcome because they bring dollars, but they also bring cost in providing those services on that land, because sometimes you have ATV, UTV accidents, fatalities. You have people that maybe consume too much weekend beverages, and then they get into disagreements, arguments, shootings, and we've seen the full array of all those types of calls excuse me, on Forest Service land, which is a big burden, big expenditure to the sheriff's office, and then to your office every time I submit cases.
And the courts and probation, just the whole criminal justice system.
Yeah. And so you look at Navajo County, there's all that land that they can't get those assessed values for taxes. And then when we don't get the PILT money, but we're still providing the service, it just puts us in further dilemma.
Jen, our time has run out. Thank you very much for joining us.
Absolutely.
We appreciate it.
Happy to be here. Thanks so much.
And thank you for joining us this month on Shooting Straight with Brad and David. And please stay tuned for this month's Most Wanted.
The Navajo County Sheriff's Office is seeking Cody Ryan Mooter, 50 years old, 6'3", blonde hair and hazel eyes. His last known residence is in the Shumway area between Snowflake and Cholo. He's wanted for felony warrant for theft of means of transportation and possession of dangerous drugs. If you have any information of Cody's whereabouts, please call the Navajo County Sheriff's Office at 928-524-4050 or anonymously contact WeTip at 1-800-78-CRIME or at wetip.com.